The morning mist hung thick over Ravencrest Palace as Captain Marcus Thorne adjusted his ceremonial sword for what he believed would be another routine day of royal protection. 23 years of loyal service to the crown had taught him to read the subtle signs of trouble, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold in the ancient halls of the monarchy. Marcus had always prided himself on being invisible, a shadow that moved silently behind the royal family, observing everything while saying nothing. His weathered face bore the scars of conflicts fought in distant lands before he accepted this prestigious position, and his steel-gray eyes missed nothing. Today, those same eyes would witness something that would shake the very foundations of the kingdom. Queen Isabella Ravencrest swept through the marble corridors with her usual grace, her emerald silk gown rustling against the polished floors. To the outside world, she was the perfect royal consort, devoted wife to King Edmund and beloved mother to their twin children. Her charitable work was legendary, her public appearances flawless, and her smile could light up any room she entered. But Marcus had spent enough time in her presence to notice the subtle changes in recent months. The Queen's conversations had become more hushed, her private meetings more frequent, and her demeanor toward the king noticeably cooler. Where once there had been genuine affection between the royal couple, now there were only carefully orchestrated public displays of unity. Marcus had dismissed these observations as the natural evolution of a long marriage under public scrutiny. But today would prove his instincts correct. King Edmund sat in his private study, reviewing trade agreements with neighboring kingdoms. At 58, he remained a formidable figure despite the silver threading through his dark hair. His dedication to his people was unwavering, often working late into the night on matters of state. Marcus respected the king's commitment, though he had noticed increasing tension in the royal household over policy. Decisions that seemed to favor tradition over progress. The king's recent announcement regarding land reforms had caused considerable controversy among the nobility. Many of the ancient families who had supported the crown for generations felt betrayed by his decision to redistribute unused noble estates to common farmers. The Queen had been particularly vocal in her private opposition to these changes, though she maintained public support for her husband's decisions. As Marcus conducted his routine security sweep of the king's study, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The usual staff members seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact and hurrying through their duties more quickly than normal. Even Mrs. Harrington, the head housekeeper who had worked at the palace for over 30 years, appeared unusually distracted when he passed her in the hallway. The first real sign of trouble came during the afternoon when Marcus noticed an unusual number of the Queen's personal guards positioned throughout the castle. These men, led by Captain Rodriguez, typically stayed close to the Queen's quarters, but today they were spread throughout the main palace areas. When Marcus questioned one of them about the change in protocol, he received only vague responses about enhanced security measures. Dr. Helena Marsh, the royal physician, arrived at the palace around 3 o'clock for what the official schedule listed as a routine checkup with the king. Marcus had worked with Dr. Marsh on several occasions and found her to be professional and trustworthy. However, her behavior today struck him as odd. She carried a larger medical bag than usual and seemed unusually nervous as she made her way to the king's chambers. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place when Marcus overheard a hushed conversation between two palace staff members near the kitchen. They spoke in worried whispers about strange deliveries that had arrived for the Queen's quarters, packages that bypassed the normal security protocols. One mentioned seeing unfamiliar men in expensive suits leaving the Queen's private offices late at night. Marcus's military training kicked in as he began to systematically observe and document everything he witnessed. His years of experience in combat zones had taught him that the most dangerous threats often came from within, disguised as routine activities. He started noting the timing of conversations, the people involved, and any deviations from normal palace routines. As evening approached, Marcus positioned himself strategically near the king's private dining room where the royal couple traditionally shared their meals when not entertaining guests. Tonight's dinner was supposed to be particularly special, celebrating the king's successful negotiation of a new trade treaty that would benefit the kingdom's economy significantly. The queen entered the dining room wearing a stunning navy blue gown, her jewelry sparkling under the crystal chandeliers. She greeted her husband with what appeared to be genuine warmth, though Marcus detected a subtle tension in her posture. The king seemed in excellent spirits, discussing his plans for implementing the new treaty and the positive impact it would have on their people. Marcus watched from his position near the entrance as the royal couple began their meal. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on their children's progress in their studies, upcoming state functions, and the king's vision for modernizing certain aspects of the monarchy. To any casual observer, it appeared to be a normal evening between a devoted married couple. However, Marcus noticed that the queen barely touched her food, instead encouraging the king to try various dishes she had specially requested from the kitchen. She was particularly insistent that he sample a new wine that had been delivered that afternoon. Claiming it was from a vineyard he had always wanted to visit, the king, always gracious and trusting of his wife's judgment, readily accepted her suggestions. He praised the wine's unique flavor and complimented the chef on the preparation of the evening's courses. As the meal progressed, Marcus observed the king becoming increasingly animated in his conversation, his gestures more expansive and his laughter more frequent than usual. It was then that Marcus noticed the king beginning to slow down mid-sentence, his words becoming slightly slurred as he reached for his wineglass. The queen leaned forward with apparent concern, asking if he was feeling unwell. The king dismissed her worries with a wave of his hand, attributing his sudden fatigue to the long day of meetings and paperwork. Within minutes, however, the king's condition deteriorated rapidly. His face grew pale, perspiration beaded on his forehead, and his breathing became labored. The queen immediately called for Dr. Marsh, who appeared with suspicious speed, almost as if she had been waiting nearby. As the physician began examining the king, Marcus realized he was witnessing something far more sinister than a simple case of food poisoning. The loyal guard's instincts screamed that he was watching an assassination attempt unfold before his eyes, orchestrated by the very woman sworn to love and protect the king. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice as he watched King Edmund collapse forward onto the dining table, his breathing becoming increasingly shallow and erratic. Years of military training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, but witnessing what appeared to be an assassination attempt on his sovereign tested every ounce of his self-control. His hand instinctively moved toward his weapon, but he forced himself to remain still, knowing that acting too quickly could make the situation worse. Dr. Marsh rushed to the king's side with practiced efficiency, but Marcus noticed something troubling in her movements. Instead of immediately calling for emergency medical assistance or demanding that the room be cleared, she seemed to be following a predetermined routine. Her medical bag contained supplies that suggested she had been expecting this exact scenario, including specific antidotes and medications that would not normally be part of a routine house call. Queen Isabella's performance was masterful, displaying exactly the right amount of panic and concern that would be expected from a devoted wife. She clutched at her husband's hand, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face as she begged Dr. Marsh to save him. Her cries for help echoed through the palace halls, bringing several staff members running to assist. To anyone watching, she appeared to be a woman desperately trying to save her husband's life. However, Marcus had positioned himself where he could observe the queen's face when she thought no one was looking. In those brief, unguarded moments between her dramatic displays of anguish, he caught glimpses of something cold and calculating in her eyes. There was no real surprise in her expression, only the focused concentration of someone executing a carefully planned operation. The king's condition continued to deteriorate despite Dr. Marsh's apparent efforts to revive him. His pulse was weak, his skin had taken on an ashen color, and his breathing had become so labored that each breath seemed like it might be his last. Marcus realized that whatever substance had been used was fast-acting and potentially fatal. If he was going to act, it would have to be soon, making a split-second decision that would change the course of his life forever. Marcus stepped forward and firmly but respectfully asked Dr. Marsh to step aside. His years of battlefield experience had included basic medical training, and he had seen the effects of various poisons during his military service. Ignoring the Queen's protests and the doctor's outraged objections, he began administering the emergency procedures he had learned for treating toxic ingestion. The Queen's mask slipped for just a moment as Marcus took charge of the situation. Her carefully maintained expression of panic was replaced by a flash of pure fury that she quickly concealed. She demanded to know what authority he had to interfere with the royal physician's treatment, but Marcus ignored her questions. Focusing entirely on stabilizing the king's condition until proper emergency medical care could arrive, Dr. Marsh attempted to regain control of the situation. Insisting that Marcus was endangering the king's life by interfering with her treatment, she reached for a syringe filled with what she claimed was a necessary medication. But Marcus noticed that her hands were trembling in a way that suggested nervousness rather than professional urgency. His instincts told him that whatever was in that syringe was meant to finish what the poisoned wine had started, using his authority as head of the king's personal security. Marcus ordered Dr. Marsh to step back while he secured the scene. He called for the palace's emergency medical team and demanded that all food and drink from the royal dinner be preserved as evidence. The Queen objected vehemently to this action, claiming that her husband needed immediate medical attention rather than a security investigation. Captain Rodriguez and several of the Queen's personal guards arrived in response to the commotion, and the tension in the room immediately escalated. Rodriguez demanded that Marcus stand down and allow Dr. Marsh to continue her treatment. The two captains had worked together for years without major conflict, but Marcus could see that Rodriguez's loyalties had been compromised, whether through bribery, threats, or genuine belief in the Queen's innocence. As the standoff continued, Marcus noticed several important details that confirmed his suspicions. The wine bottle that the Queen had insisted the king try was not among the collection in the royal wine cellar, and its label bore no resemblance to any vineyard the king had ever expressed interest in visiting. The dinner plates had been prepared in the Queen's private kitchen rather than the main palace kitchens. Bypassing normal security protocols for royal meals, the emergency medical team arrived within minutes, led by Dr. Sarah Chun, the hospital's chief toxicologist. Marcus had worked with Dr. Chun during a previous incident involving threats against the royal family and trusted her professional judgment completely. She immediately began administering activated charcoal and other treatments for suspected poisoning, while ordering blood and tissue samples to be sent for immediate analysis. Dr. Chun's quick actions began to stabilize the king's condition, though he remained unconscious and critically ill. Her preliminary assessment confirmed Marcus's worst fears. The king had been poisoned with a sophisticated toxin that would have been fatal without immediate intervention. The timing and dosage suggested someone with considerable knowledge of both chemistry and the king's physical condition. Queen Isabella's behavior became increasingly erratic as it became clear that her husband would survive the assassination attempt. She demanded that Dr. Marsh be allowed to continue treating the king, claiming that the hospital's interventions were unnecessary and potentially harmful. She also insisted that the entire incident be kept secret from the public to avoid causing panic throughout the kingdom. Marcus knew that he was walking a dangerous line by openly suspecting the Queen of attempted murder, but the evidence was becoming overwhelming. The coordinated timing of Dr. Marsh's arrival, the strategic positioning of the Queen's guards throughout the palace, and the use of an untraceable poison all pointed to a carefully orchestrated plot that had been planned for weeks or possibly months. The palace communications system was immediately secured to prevent any unauthorized contact with outside parties. Marcus ordered a complete lockdown of the royal wing, with no one permitted to enter or leave without his explicit authorization. This decision was met with strong resistance from the Queen and her supporters, but Marcus knew that preserving the crime scene and preventing the Destruction of evidence was crucial. As the king was prepared for emergency transport to the royal hospital, Marcus made the difficult decision to place both Dr. Marsh and Queen Isabella under protective custody. He could not prove their guilt beyond doubt, but he could not risk allowing potential conspirators to escape or destroy evidence while the investigation was in its early stages. The Queen's reaction to being detained was immediate and explosive. She demanded to know how a mere guard dared to accuse the Queen of England of such a heinous crime. Her protests were loud enough to be heard throughout the palace, and Marcus knew that word of the evening's events would spread quickly despite his efforts to maintain secrecy. As emergency vehicles arrived to transport the king to the hospital, Marcus realized that he had just initiated a chain of events that would either vindicate his actions or destroy his career and possibly his life. The evidence he had observed pointed clearly toward a conspiracy involving the Queen, but proving it would require more than the testimony of a loyal guard who had acted on instinct and suspicion. The palace descended into controlled chaos as news of the king's critical condition spread through the royal staff. Marcus found himself at the center of a political firestorm that threatened to tear apart the very institution he had sworn to protect. The Queen's supporters rallied quickly, led by Lord Chancellor William Pemberton, who arrived within an hour of the incident. With a team of the kingdom's most powerful lawyers and political advisors, Lord Pemberton was a formidable opponent, having served the royal family for over 2 decades and wielding considerable influence in both legal and political circles. His first action was to demand Marcus's immediate dismissal and arrest for what he termed treasonous accusations against Her Majesty. The Chancellor's arrival transformed what had been a security incident into a full-scale constitutional crisis that would test the limits of law and loyalty within the monarchy. Marcus knew that his position was precarious at best. Without concrete evidence to support his suspicions, his actions could easily be portrayed as the paranoid delusions of an overzealous guard who had overstepped his authority. However, his years of military experience had taught him that sometimes the right course of action required taking calculated risks, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Eleanor Harrington. The head housekeeper approached Marcus privately with information that could change everything. Her hands trembled as she revealed that she had been documenting unusual activities in the palace for several weeks, driven by her own concerns about the Queen's behavior and the strange visitors who had been frequenting the royal quarters. Mrs. Harrington had served the royal family faithfully for 31 years, and her loyalty to the institution was unquestionable. She had noticed the delivery of unmarked packages to the Queen's private chambers, meetings with individuals who were not on any official visitor lists, and conversations conducted in hushed tones that stopped abruptly whenever staff members approached. Her detailed notes provided a timeline that corroborated Marcus's observations about the planning that had gone into the evening's events. The housekeeper also revealed that she had overheard a telephone conversation between the Queen and an unknown male caller 3 days before the assassination attempt. The Queen had spoken about timing being crucial and ensuring that everything was in place for Thursday evening. While the conversation could have referred to any number of royal events, the timing and secretive nature suggested something more sinister. Dr. Sarah Chion's preliminary toxicology results provided the first concrete evidence that supported Marcus's suspicions. The king had been poisoned with a rare compound called Novichok derivative, a sophisticated toxin that was not readily available through normal channels. The substance was designed to mimic the symptoms of a heart attack or stroke, making it an ideal weapon for someone seeking to commit the perfect murder. The toxin's exotic nature meant that whoever had administered it possessed either considerable chemical knowledge or access to highly specialized resources. Dr. Chun estimated that the king had consumed enough poison to kill 3 average-sized men, but his larger build and excellent physical condition had bought crucial time for medical intervention. Without Marcus's quick thinking and the emergency team's rapid response, The king would certainly have died within the hour. As the investigation expanded, Marcus discovered that Dr. Helena Marsh had been carrying forged medical credentials for over 2 years. Her real name was Dr. Helena Morrison, and she had been stripped of her medical license in Canada, following allegations of participating in illegal euthanasia schemes. The sophisticated nature of her false identity suggested backing by a well-funded organization, with access to professional document forgers and identity specialists. The revelation about Dr. Marsh's true identity sent shockwaves through the palace's security apparatus. Her appointment as royal physician had been personally recommended by Queen Isabella herself, bypassing the normal vetting procedures that would have uncovered her criminal background. This connection provided the first direct link between the Queen and the assassination plot, though Lord Pemberton argued that the Queen had simply been deceived by convincing false credentials. Captain Rodriguez found himself in an impossible position as the investigation revealed his own unwitting involvement in the conspiracy. The Queen had been feeding him false intelligence about potential threats against her life, leading him to position his guards throughout the palace in ways that actually facilitated the assassination attempt. His genuine concern for the Queen's safety had been manipulated to serve her deadly agenda. Leaving him devastated by the realization of his betrayal, the Queen's legal team launched a fierce counterattack, arguing that Marcus had no authority to detain a member of the royal family and that his actions constituted a coup attempt against the legitimate monarchy. They demanded access to all evidence and witnesses, claiming that the investigation was being conducted by biased parties with personal vendettas against the Queen. Their strategy was clearly to overwhelm the investigation with legal challenges while portraying the Queen as the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by disloyal palace staff. Meanwhile, the king remained unconscious in the Royal Medical Facility's intensive care unit, his condition stable but critical. The antidotes administered by Dr. Chun had prevented the poison from causing permanent damage to his vital organs, but his recovery would take weeks and might leave him with long-term health complications. The uncertainty surrounding the king's future created a power vacuum that various political factions were already maneuvering to fill. Prince James and Princess Catherine, the royal twins, were immediately placed under protective custody at a secure location outside the palace. At 19 years old, they were old enough to understand the gravity of the situation, but young enough to be devastated by the betrayal of their mother. Their statements to investigators revealed that they had noticed increasing tension between their parents over the past year, particularly regarding the king's progressive policies and the Queen's traditional views. The international implications of the assassination attempt began to emerge as foreign intelligence agencies offered their assistance with the investigation. Several allied nations had been monitoring unusual financial transactions linked to accounts associated with Queen Isabella's charitable foundation. These transactions suggested that substantial sums of money had been moving through offshore accounts in the months leading up to the assassination attempt, potentially funding the conspiracy. Marcus's detailed security reports from the past 6 months proved invaluable in establishing a pattern of suspicious activity around the Queen. His observations about her changed behavior, unusual meetings, and altered routines provided investigators with specific dates and times that could be cross-referenced with financial records, communication logs, and travel documents. The meticulous nature of his documentation demonstrated the professional competence that would be crucial in any legal proceedings. The British Security Service arrived at the palace 12 hours after the assassination attempt, taking control of the investigation from local authorities. Their involvement elevated the incident from a domestic crime to a matter of national security, bringing additional resources and expertise to bear on uncovering the full extent of the conspiracy. Agent Director Margaret Thornfield, a veteran of international espionage cases, would lead the expanded investigation with broad powers to pursue evidence wherever it might lead. As dawn broke over Ravencrest Palace, Marcus realized that he had initiated something far larger than a simple criminal investigation. The attempted murder of the king had exposed deep fractures within the royal family and the institutions that supported the monarchy. The coming days would test not only his own courage and integrity, but the very foundations of the constitutional system he had sworn to defend. Agent Director Margaret Thornfield arrived at Ravencrest Palace with a team of specialists who transformed the royal residence into what resembled a crime scene from a high-stakes international thriller. Her reputation for uncovering complex political conspiracies preceded her, and Marcus felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as the investigation moved beyond his capabilities into the hands of professionals trained in espionage and counterintelligence, the security services. First major discovery came from analysis of the Queen's private communications, which revealed a network of encrypted messages exchanged with contacts in 3 different countries. The sophisticated encryption method suggested involvement by intelligence operatives or organized crime syndicates with access to military-grade technology. Most disturbing was evidence that the assassination plot had been planned for over 8 months, with contingency plans developed for various scenarios. Depending on the king's schedule and security arrangements, Dr. Helena Marsh, faced with overwhelming evidence of her participation in the conspiracy, agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for protection from what she claimed were threats against her life. Her testimony revealed that she had been recruited by intermediaries who represented themselves as concerned parties working to prevent what they described as the king's dangerous progressive policies that would destabilize the monarchy and threaten national security. The fake physician's account painted a picture of a conspiracy that extended far beyond the palace walls. She described meetings with well-dressed individuals who spoke with refined accents and demonstrated detailed knowledge of royal protocols and security procedures. These conspirators had provided her with the poison, the forged credentials necessary to gain access to the royal household, and specific instructions about timing and methods for administering the fatal dose. Queen Isabella's charitable foundation, which had been praised internationally for its humanitarian work, became the focus of intense financial scrutiny. Forensic accountants discovered that over £2 million had been diverted through a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. The money trail led to payments for services that included surveillance equipment, communication devices, chemical supplies, and substantial payments to individuals whose identities remained hidden behind layers of corporate secrecy. The investigation revealed that the Queen's motivation extended beyond personal animosity toward her husband. Secret recordings obtained from her private chambers captured conversations in which she expressed deep resentment about the king's plans to modernize the monarchy and reduce the traditional privileges of the aristocratic class. She viewed his progressive policies as a betrayal of centuries of royal tradition and genuinely believed that removing him was necessary to preserve the institution. Lord Chancellor Pemberton's legal defense of the Queen began to crumble as evidence mounted against his client. His own communications were scrutinized, revealing that he had received substantial donations to his various political causes from sources that traced back to the same offshore accounts funding the assassination conspiracy. While investigators could not prove that Pemberton was aware of the murder plot, his financial ties to the conspirators raised serious questions about his loyalty and judgment. Marcus found himself at the center of a media firestorm as news of the investigation leaked to the press despite strict security measures. His background was scrutinized by journalists, who portrayed him alternately as a heroic whistleblower and a disloyal servant who had betrayed his oath to protect the royal family. The pressure was intense, but his military training in handling hostile situations helped him maintain his composure while continuing to assist with the investigation. The king's condition began to improve gradually, though he remained unconscious and unaware of the dramatic events unfolding around him. Dr. Chun's medical team worked around the clock to counteract the long-term effects of the poison, while security specialists ensured that his hospital room was protected against any further assassination attempts. The uncertainty about his recovery created a constitutional crisis regarding who should assume royal powers during his incapacitation. International implications of the conspiracy became clearer as Allied intelligence services shared information about suspicious activities they had been monitoring. The assassination plot appeared to be connected to a broader campaign aimed at destabilizing moderate governments across Europe. Several other progressive political leaders had experienced mysterious health problems or security incidents that were now being investigated as potential assassination attempts by the same network. The Queen's legal team made increasingly desperate attempts to discredit the evidence against their client. They argued that the financial irregularities in her foundation were the result of fraud by subordinates, that her communications had been taken out of context, and that Dr. Marsh's testimony was unreliable due to her criminal background. However, the sheer volume of evidence and the consistency of multiple independent sources made their arguments increasingly implausible. Captain Rodriguez faced his own professional and personal reckoning as investigators revealed how his genuine concern for the Queen's safety had been manipulated to serve the conspiracy. His positioning of guards throughout the palace had created security gaps that facilitated the assassination attempt, and his failure to report suspicious activities would require formal disciplinary action. The betrayal of his trust left him questioning everything he thought he knew about loyalty and duty. Mrs. Harrington's detailed documentation proved crucial in establishing timelines and patterns that corroborated other evidence. Her 31 years of faithful service to the royal family lent credibility to her observations, and her willingness to speak out despite potential retaliation demonstrated the kind of institutional loyalty that the conspiracy had sought to exploit. Her testimony helped investigators understand how the Queen had manipulated palace routines to create opportunities for the assassination attempt. The royal twins, Prince James and Princess Catherine, provided heartbreaking testimony about the deterioration of their family relationships over the past year. They described increasingly tense conversations between their parents, their mother's growing criticism of their father's policies, and her frequent private meetings with visitors they did not recognize. Their accounts confirmed that the conspiracy had created fractures within the royal family that extended far beyond the immediate assassination plot. Agent Thornfield's team uncovered evidence that the assassination attempt was intended to be the first phase of a larger operation. Following the king's death, the conspirators planned to use their influence over the Queen to reverse his progressive policies and restore traditional aristocratic privileges. The plot included plans for manipulating public opinion through media campaigns and ensuring that sympathetic individuals were appointed to key positions throughout the government. The investigation also revealed security failures that had made the assassination attempt possible. Background checks had been inadequate, communication protocols had been compromised, and traditional palace procedures had been bypassed in ways that created vulnerabilities. These systemic problems suggested that reform of royal security would be necessary, regardless of the investigation's outcome. As evidence continued to mount, it became clear that Queen Isabella's arrest was inevitable. The legal case against her included charges of conspiracy to commit murder, treason, financial fraud, and abuse of her position within the constitutional monarchy. The severity of the charges meant that she could face life imprisonment if convicted, representing an unprecedented crisis for the institution she had sought to preserve through murder. The monarchy itself faced questions about its future as the full scope of the conspiracy became public knowledge. The revelation that the Queen had attempted to murder the king for political reasons undermined public confidence in the royal family and raised fundamental questions about the role of hereditary privilege in modern democratic society. Marcus realized that his decision to act on his suspicions had not only saved the king's life but had exposed contradictions within the monarchical system that would require careful resolution to preserve national stability. The arrest of Queen Isabella Ravencrest sent shockwaves through the global community as news outlets struggled to comprehend the unprecedented nature of the charges against a sitting monarch. Marcus watched from the palace security office as armed officers escorted the queen from her chambers, her regal composure finally cracking as the reality of her situation became undeniable. The woman who had once commanded respect and admiration from millions now faced the prospect of spending the rest of her life behind bars for attempting to murder her own husband. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Due to the overwhelming evidence compiled by Agent Thornfield's team, the Crown Prosecution Service, faced with the extraordinary circumstances of prosecuting a member of the royal family, assembled their most experienced legal experts to handle the case. The charges included high treason, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and abuse of power, each carrying severe penalties that reflected the gravity of her crimes against both her family and the state. King Edmund's gradual recovery provided both hope and complexity to the unfolding drama. When he finally regained consciousness after 6 days in intensive care, his first words were expressions of disbelief at the accusations against his wife. The poison had affected his short-term memory, leaving him with only fragmented recollections of the dinner that nearly claimed his life. Dr. Chun's medical team worked carefully to help him understand what had happened while monitoring his emotional and physical responses to the devastating revelations. The king's reaction to learning of his wife's betrayal was heartbreaking to witness. 25 years of marriage, 2 children, and countless shared experiences had been built on what he now realized was a foundation of deception and manipulation. His grief was compounded by the realization that his progressive policies, which he had believed would benefit the people, had driven his wife to attempt murder. The emotional trauma threatened to undermine his physical recovery and created additional challenges for his medical team. Marcus found his role evolving from security officer to key witness as preparations for the trial intensified. His detailed observations and quick thinking had not only saved the king's life but had preserved crucial evidence that would be essential for securing convictions against all members of the conspiracy. The pressure of testifying against the queen was immense, but his military background and sense of duty to the crown provided the strength needed to face the challenge. The international conspiracy network that had supported the Queen's assassination plot began to unravel as intelligence agencies coordinated their investigations across multiple countries. Arrests were made in Switzerland, Monaco, and the Cayman Islands as financial investigators tracked the flow of money that had funded the operation. The scale of the conspiracy suggested involvement by individuals with significant resources and political connections who viewed progressive monarchies as threats to their traditional power. Structures. Dr. Helena Marsh's continued cooperation with authorities revealed additional details about the recruitment and training process that had prepared her for the assassination. She described sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques used to convince her that killing the king was a patriotic duty necessary to save the monarchy from destruction. The conspirators had exploited her financial difficulties and professional setbacks to create dependency and loyalty that ultimately led to her participation in murder. The royal twins struggled with the devastating impact of their mother's actions on their own futures within the monarchy. Prince James, as the heir apparent, faced questions about whether he could ever trust anyone close to him again, while Princess Catherine dealt with the trauma of learning that her mother had planned to make her an orphan for political gain. Their strength and resilience during this crisis demonstrated the positive influence of their fathers' values and provided hope for the monarchy's future. Public reaction to the Queen's arrest was divided along political and social lines. Traditional monarchists expressed shock and disbelief that a queen could be capable of such treachery. while Republicans argued that the incident demonstrated the inherent corruption of hereditary power structures. Polls showed declining support for the monarchy overall, though the king's personal popularity remained strong due to sympathy for his suffering and respect for his progressive policies. Lord Chancellor Pemberton's resignation and subsequent arrest on charges of financial impropriety marked the end of his distinguished career in royal service. His involvement in the conspiracy, while likely unwitting, had compromised his ability to serve the crown effectively. The investigation into his finances revealed a pattern of poor judgment and conflicts of interest that raised questions about oversight and accountability within royal institutions. The trial preparations revealed the sophisticated nature of the assassination plot and the careful planning that had gone into every aspect of the operation. Security camera footage, communication records, financial transactions, and witness testimony created a comprehensive picture of premeditation that left little room for doubt about the Queen's guilt. Her legal team's strategy shifted from denying involvement to arguing that she had been manipulated by more sophisticated conspirators who had exploited her genuine concerns about the monarchy's future. Captain Rodriguez faced a court-martial for his security failures, though the proceedings took into account his unwitting manipulation by the Queen. His genuine remorse and cooperation with the investigation helped mitigate the consequences of his actions. But his career in royal protection was effectively over. The incident highlighted the need for better training and protocols to prevent similar manipulation of security personnel in the future. Agent Thornfield's investigation uncovered evidence that the conspiracy had tentacles reaching into several other European royal families and political institutions. The network appeared to be a well-funded operation aimed at preventing progressive political reforms across the continent. The revelation that the Queen's assassination attempt was part of a broader campaign added urgency to international cooperation in dismantling the conspiracies. INFRASTRUC, Mrs. Harrington, received recognition for her courage in speaking out about suspicious activities, though she struggled with guilt about not acting sooner. Her detailed documentation had been instrumental in building the case against the Queen, and her 31 years of loyal service to the royal family lent credibility to her testimony. The palace administration implemented new protocols for reporting suspicious activities based on lessons learned from her experience. The king's physical recovery progressed steadily, but the emotional healing would take much longer. His trust in those around him had been shattered by his wife's betrayal, and his confidence in his own judgment was severely undermined. The progressive policies that had motivated the assassination attempt were put on hold while he focused on recovery and rebuilding the institutions that had failed to protect him from such an intimate betrayal. As the trial date approached, Marcus reflected on the events that had transformed his life from that of a loyal guard to a key figure in one of the most significant royal scandals in modern history. His decision to act on suspicion rather than protocol had prevented a murder and exposed a conspiracy that threatened the stability of democratic institutions across Europe. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but his commitment to truth and justice remained unwavering. The monarchy faced an uncertain future as the full extent of the Queen's crimes became public knowledge. Constitutional experts debated the implications of prosecuting a sitting queen and the precedent it would set for holding royal family members accountable for their actions. The institution that had survived wars, scandals, and social upheaval now faced its greatest challenge, proving that it could adapt and reform while maintaining the stability and tradition that had made it enduring. The trial of Queen Isabella Ravencrest opened at the Central Criminal Court amid unprecedented security measures and international media attention. Marcus stood as the prosecution's star witness, his military bearing and unshakable testimony providing the foundation for a case that would determine not only the Queen's fate but the future of the monarchy itself. The courtroom was filled with legal experts, international observers, and family members whose lives had been forever changed by the events of that fateful evening. Judge Sir Richard Blackwood, known for his handling of high-profile cases involving national security, presided over proceedings with the gravity and fairness required by such extraordinary circumstances. The prosecution team, led by Sir Margaret Ashworth QC, presented a methodical case built on forensic evidence, financial records, witness testimony, and the extensive documentation compiled during the investigation. Their strategy was to demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt that the Queen had orchestrated a sophisticated assassination plot driven by political ideology and personal ambition. Marcus's testimony lasted 3 days, during which he recounted his observations leading up to the assassination attempt, his decision to intervene during the dinner, and his subsequent actions to preserve evidence and protect the king's life. Under intense cross-examination by the Queen's defense team, he remained composed and consistent, his military training evident in his precise recollection of events and unwavering commitment to factual accuracy. His credibility as a witness proved unshakable, despite attempts to portray him as a disloyal guard seeking attention. Dr. Helena Marsh's testimony provided crucial insight into the conspiracy's inner workings and the Queen's direct involvement in planning the assassination. Despite attempts by the defense to discredit her as a desperate criminal seeking leniency, her detailed knowledge of events and corroborating evidence made her account compelling. She described specific conversations with the Queen about timing, methods, and contingency plans that demonstrated premeditation and cold calculation in planning her husband's murder. The financial evidence presented by forensic accountants traced millions of pounds through complex offshore networks that had funded the assassination plot. The money trail connected directly to accounts controlled by the Queen's Charitable Foundation and revealed payments for surveillance, chemical supplies, forged documents, and substantial sums to unidentified individuals involved in the conspiracy. The sophisticated nature of these financial arrangements demonstrated extensive planning and access to professional criminal resources. King Edmund's appearance as a witness was one of the most dramatic moments of the trial. Still recovering from the effects of the poison, he testified about his marriage to Isabella, their growing political disagreements, and his shock at learning of her betrayal, his dignity and composure while describing the attempted murder by his wife of 25 years moved observers and demonstrated the personal cost of political extremism. His testimony confirmed that he had no knowledge of the plot and had trusted his wife completely until the moment Marcus saved his life. The Queen's defense team argued that she had been manipulated by more sophisticated conspirators who had exploited her genuine concerns about the monarchy's future. They portrayed her as a victim of psychological manipulation by individuals with their own political agendas, who had convinced her that drastic action was necessary to preserve traditional values. However, the extensive evidence of her active participation in planning and executing the assassination attempt made this argument difficult to sustain. International testimony revealed the broader scope of the conspiracy and its connections to similar plots against progressive leaders across Europe. Intelligence officials from allied nations described a network of wealthy individuals and organizations dedicated to preventing democratic reforms and maintaining traditional power structures. The Queen's assassination attempt was revealed to be part of a coordinated campaign that threatened stability across the continent. The revelation that several members of the aristocracy had provided financial support for the conspiracy sent shockwaves through British high society. Arrests of prominent nobles and wealthy business leaders demonstrated that the plot had deep roots in the traditional establishment that felt threatened by the king's progressive policies. The trials of these co-conspirators would continue for months, exposing the extent of resistance to democratic reform among privileged elites. Prince James and Princess Catherine's testimony about their family relationships provided heartbreaking insight into how political ideology had poisoned their home life. They described their mother's increasing bitterness about their father's policies and her attempts to influence their own political views against their father's progressive agenda. Their strength and dignity during this ordeal demonstrated the positive values their father had instilled despite their mother's manipulative behavior. The jury's deliberations lasted only 18 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Against the Queen, the evidence had been overwhelming, and the systematic nature of her crimes left little room for doubt about her guilt. Judge Blackwood sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, noting that her betrayal of public trust and abuse of her constitutional position represented crimes against both her family and the state that demanded the maximum penalty. The Queen's reaction to the verdict was one of defiant anger rather than remorse. She maintained that her actions had been motivated by love of country and concern for the monarchy's future, showing no recognition of the harm she had caused to her family and the institution she claimed to protect. Her lack of remorse and continued justification of attempted murder demonstrated the depth of her ideological commitment and the danger she would have continued to represent if her plot had succeeded. King Edmund's statement following the trial demonstrated remarkable grace and wisdom in addressing both his personal trauma and the constitutional crisis created by his wife's crimes. He reaffirmed his commitment to progressive policies while acknowledging the legitimate concerns of those who oppose change. His call for unity and understanding, despite the attempted murder by his own wife, earned widespread respect and helped begin the process of healing the divisions exposed by the conspiracy. The institutional reforms implemented following the trial addressed the security failures and oversight gaps that had made the assassination plot possible. New protocols for background checks, financial monitoring, and reporting suspicious activities were designed to prevent similar conspiracies from taking root within royal institutions. The changes balanced security needs with the openness and accessibility that characterized modern democratic monarchies. Marcus received recognition for his courage and quick thinking, but he struggled with the knowledge that his actions had destroyed a royal marriage and exposed the monarchy to unprecedented scandal. His commitment to duty and truth had saved the king's life and preserved democratic institutions, but the personal cost had been enormous. He chose to retire from royal service and pursue a quieter life, though his actions would be remembered as a defining moment in the monarchy's history. The monarchy emerged from the crisis fundamentally changed but ultimately strengthened by its willingness to hold even its highest members accountable for their actions. Public support gradually recovered as King Edmund's leadership during the crisis demonstrated the values and integrity that justified the institution's continued existence. The trial had proved that no one, regardless of position or privilege, was above the law in a truly democratic society. The International Conspiracy Network continued to face investigation and prosecution as authorities worked to dismantle the infrastructure that had supported multiple assassination attempts across Europe. The Queen's trial had exposed the threat posed by well-funded extremists who viewed democratic progress as a threat to their traditional privileges. The ongoing fight against these forces would require continued vigilance and international cooperation. Years later, the attempted assassination of King Edmund would be remembered as a turning point that tested and ultimately strengthened democratic institutions. Marcus's courage in acting on his suspicions had prevented a murder and exposed a conspiracy that threatened the foundations of constitutional government. The monarchy's survival and renewal following such betrayal demonstrated the resilience of institutions committed to truth, justice, and the rule of law over personal privilege and political ideology.